Hello, and welcome to the MIT Open Documentary Lab talk. Today, we are joined by Caspar Sonnen and Amaury La Burthe. If you want to join, hello, Amaury, and hello, Caspar. Caspar is the head of the IDFA DocLab, and he's going to tell us about the DocLab and also why he chose Amaury's presentation as the talk he wanted to present with us today. Amaury has had a long career as the creative director, sound artist, technologist of many interactive media, including stints at Sony and Ubisoft, where he worked on many AA franchise games and award-winning experiences. He then became interested in the environmental impact of this work and became the co-creator of CEPIR, which is his research initiative that examines and designs methods for a more sustainable immersive sector. He's been working on this for years, and we've been following it together with IDFA DocLab, and I'm really thrilled that it's out there in the world and that we're going to learn about it today. But before we turn to Amaury, Caspar is going to talk to us about the lab and why he supported this work. So without further ado, Caspar Sonnen.
Thanks, Sarah and Mavish and everybody at Open DocLab for inviting us. I'll try to share my screen and spend about 10 minutes saying a bit about who we are and what we've been doing and how we got to Amaury and his work. Let's see if all of this is going well and if you can see my screen. Can somebody give me a thumbs up if yeah, great. So as said, my name is Caspar Sonnen. Caspar at idfa.nl is where you can reach me, or our website is over here.
It's all black.
It's all black. You cannot see the screen?
I could briefly see it. Now it's all black.
Now it's all black. Let's see. Can you see anything now?
Oh, briefly. Like 1
briefly.
Yeah,
so exciting, so exciting. Let's see, what can we do about this?
It's working now. We can
I
see
can
it.
see it now, Caspar.
Yeah. You can see it now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Except it's not in play mode, but yes.
It's not in play mode. Okay, well, then you can see what's coming next as well.
Yes.
Good. So let me start. I've been working at IDFA for a long time. IDFA is the International Documentary Film Festival, Amsterdam. It's one of the world's biggest documentary festivals. And we started the DocLab program in 2007, which is a long time ago. The iPhone didn't exist yet. What is it? MySpace was huge. Those were the days. And we started to explore art on the boundaries of technology, and mostly interactive web documentaries, things that in 2007 were mostly made for the laptop. And I think one of the challenges of us as a festival was how to present this. How do we take something that's made for a small screen or an interactive device, and how do we present this in a collective, physical, festive setting that a festival is? And that became, and to this day, is still one of our main ambitions, is how to present these ephemeral digital art, virtual media in a way that we can collectively celebrate it. And over the years, of course, interactive media have grew tremendously, diversified in all kinds of platforms, from immersive theater to virtual and augmented reality, but also games, digital art, sensory installations, bioart, artificial intelligence. These are all things that we look for, and look for the best artworks using these new technologies. We present them annually within our festival, meaning, which is, let's see if I can display a little bit. Yeah. So our festival contains a conference, a big exhibition. We host a lot of live performances. And besides that, there's a market. We have a summit where we bring experts from the field. And we have an R&D program, which I will say a little bit more real quick. But basically, we are a place to gather, to showcase, to explore, to experiment with everything, art and technology merging together. And what's interesting about new media, to quote William Oricchio, one of the people and founders of MIT's Open DocLab, a new medium is always marketed as better, more realistic, and as a solution to the problems of all media that came before it. And that's something that I think everybody working in this space knows a lot about, because we have the beautiful moment when we're inventing a new medium or when we're creating an industry around it, to not repeat all the mistakes that we inherited from traditional media. We are able to start with a blank slate to a certain extent. However, it's not as easy as it is, and making a new medium is tricky. Developing a new medium is hard. So I think if we're talking about something like virtual reality, on the one side we have Apple now finally having its own headset out there for a ridiculously high price from a consumer point of view. We have headsets being promoted and subsidized heavily by Meta for the last couple of years. But I'm not sure if collectively we are at a position to say it has become a mainstream medium. We are there yet. I think this little comic illustrated it well, saying, and so Lucas, a father reading to his boy, and so Lucas and all his friends simply chose to ignore the metaverse, and in the end, it went away. In a way, to me, this is funny, but also sad. It reflects the reality that a lot of headsets are being bought, gathering dust after 3 months, because there's not enough for people to see. And yet, at the same time, VR, immersive media are some of the more exciting things we've seen in new media. So that's why we joined forces a couple of years ago together with MIT Open DocLab to not just showcase some of our favorite things, but also to explore how to present these things, what works, what doesn't work. And before I hand it over to Amaury, I just want to share a couple of the things that we've discovered showing, exhibiting these works for the last 18 years. And some of the things we try to do when we bring this together and see how we can connect with audiences. So one of them is embrace collectivity. VR is always seen as or often seen as an isolating, solitary experience. But I think from the very earliest beginnings of VR, you can see here, I think it's a DK1 or a DK2, projects like The Machine to Be Another, artists really exploring how can you create communal, collective shared experiences using VR. We've seen a lot of this, of course, if we look at things like immersive theater. There's a lot of learnings there that are being applied slowly but surely to the immersive space. As an example of this, Slumberland that we showed 2 years ago by the Swedish immersive theater groups Bombina Bombast, creating a shared communal immersive experience with actually the performers. This is you're seeing here the audience experience something, a space together, where the performers were actually in a mocap studio in a different country. And I think if we look at what MIT has been doing, an interesting example of embracing collectivity is the collective wisdom research that Kat Cizek and Sarah and William have been doing over at MIT. A great resource for seeing what it means to actually co-create and work together. Another thing we love to embrace within the festival is the senses. So that means not just spatial media, but also really trying to embrace all different kinds of senses to play with. An older example is smell dating, that invited people to find their next partner or find which people they were attracted to just based on smell. Anagram, I think a great group of artists that, with a project like the Collider, actually played with sensory deprivation or with putting the senses into different people in the audience. And if you want to know more about using the senses in immersive art, there's a great article that we were able to publish a year ago around where we collected some of the learnings from different artists working with smell, working with touch, working with taste, with sound, etc. I think more, if we look further, I think embracing new spaces, especially during the pandemic, was something the immersive field was really at the forefront of. Over at our festival, we had a couple of years where we created hybrid spaces, online spaces, figured out all these kinds of ways of fusing, merging, hacking the online world, hacking the physical world. This is, for those who know Kent Bai, one of the most important, I would say, voices within the immersive space, exploring immersive media through his podcast, Voices of VR. Who of course couldn't be with our festival, but we had a nice little moment together. Jokes aside, this was an interesting field of research that that MIT created a beautiful report called Creating Community in Hybrid Festivals, looking at different festivals and different explorations of hybridity. And I think as much as we learned at the same time, if anything, with the pandemic to a large part behind us, embracing old-fashioned physical things, I think we sort of relearned the beauty and the value of that. We've seen this over the years with various different artists making digital ephemeral things, but then at the same time exploring how to bring this to audiences using physical old-fashioned formats like the book or the card game. And as a testament to this, one of the winners of our award last year was Ant Hampton's Borderline Visible, a physical book with a simple QR code that invites you to listen, have a time-based experience while you flip through the book with instructions being told to you through audio. It's a new format using the oldest, simplest book as an example, fusing it with new kinds of digital storytelling. Besides formats for art, we also look a lot at old-fashioned buildings, exploring different spaces where we can present these works. From one of the more familiar ones to us being the cinema. And as part of our R&D program, the New Reality initiative was started in the Netherlands, and we were very happy to be a small part of this. It's called New Reality, and it's a pilot program bringing collective VR screenings to cinemas in the Netherlands. And it's been actually quite successful as a way of introducing VR to completely new audiences. And it's kind of a win-win with cinemas in the Netherlands struggling to get a younger audience, to get new audiences, especially after the pandemic. And this is one of the things where new media and old media really meet each other. And also, by the way, I think one of the projects that a lot of people had never heard about is Notes on Blindness. To me, still one of the early masterpieces of immersive media, made by Amaury La Burthe, of course. And to me, this was a very happy thing. Projects that were shown at the festival, then festivals move on, but actually only a handful of people have seen a project like that. So bringing something like that to a year-round location is something we're very excited about. A similar thing, of course, we are not part of the Sphere in Las Vegas, but I think it's an interesting thing that this is getting quite some attention, even though this is in many ways just an old-fashioned format called the planetarium or full dome, which is something that exists in many cities for years and years and years. And over the last 5 years, we've been working a lot with the Amsterdam Zoo, which has their own planetarium. really exploring how can we do collective immersive screenings. And it's proven to be one of the more successful formats. I think if we look at physical spaces for presenting immersive, the planetarium has proven to be one of those spaces. And finally, I think I'm very happy that a few weeks ago here in Amsterdam, we were able to open het documentaire pavilion, the documentary pavilion in Vondelpark, Amsterdam's Central Park. And this building that you see here in this image is actually where we have our offices as a festival, but we are also invited to open this up as a public space. And we've been presenting a VR gallery here last week. We've been, and we're exploring all kinds of ways of, besides showing documentary films, to also throughout the year, create this as a home for immersive media as well. That said, I think a lot of these activities that we've been doing at the festival over the last 18 years, presenting new media, digital media, virtual media, physically in a physical collective way, has always had this little tiny voice on my in my ear saying, "What are we doing here?" Right? We set this up for 10 days. People travel from all over the world to put on a headset and see some of these experiences. How many people do we actually reach here? What are the costs of making these things, of setting these things up only for 10 days and then it's gone again? VR or like festivals are a launch pad, but a launch pad to what? If we look at VR, I think there's been a lot of conversation around, well, of course, it's a huge it has a huge impact on the climate of doing things this way. Wouldn't it be better if people see things from their own home? Questions like that became not just a little voice in our own head, but became quite an explicit thing when Landia Egal and Amaury La Burthe presented Okavari, which was a VR project, a physical VR installation using not just recycled materials to build the physical experience, but also recycling some of the digital assets that they've developed for previous projects. And I leave it to Amaury to tell us all about both Okavari and what it led to, because it led to the CEPIR project. I think a quite radical and confrontational and brutally honest research project into the impact of the XR industry on the climate and its potential ways of exploring alternative ways of creating a VR or XR industry. On that note, I'm going to hand it over to Amaury. After, I just wanted to share, for those of you who are working on a project, who are interested in presenting your work in Amsterdam in November, we have this Thursday, we actually have our first deadline for submissions. We have our final deadline on July 2nd. And just reach out to me if you have any questions or if you want to submit. On that note, Amaury, are you ready to try and get your slides on the screen a little bit more smoothly than me?
Yes, I'm ready. And thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you, Sarah and Mavish, also for inviting me to share all of the collective work that has been done in CEPIR. So hopefully you should see my screen by now. Looks like everybody's seeing it. So yeah, cool. So I'll try to not bury you with numbers, but there's a good number of things I'd like to talk about. So I'll go a bit quickly. Don't worry about the numbers. If you have specific, more technical questions, you can ask them at the end during the Q&A. So to give a bit of context and perspective, I'm going to briefly introduce myself, not because I like to talk about me. I really don't like that. The idea is really to give you hints on where I'm talking from and what was the CEPIR project. project. So I'm an author, director, producer, and founder of the VR studio called Novelab. We've been working in tech since 2009 and in the immersive sector since 2013, roughly since DK1. The studio has now released probably more than 150 immersive projects and is more than 50 people now. And I have a background in R&D and video game. So I was used to game engines like Unity and Unreal, and I was used to conceive immersive space like 3D space with interactivity. Those are a couple of projects, and you've talked very nicely about Not Sold by Ness, which was my first project as an author in VR. That's a little selection. Some of them have been in different festivals. So I'm really not a climate change expert or a carbon expert, but more a creative entrepreneur. And I'm really talking from within the immersive industry, not as a climate change expert. So it all started around 2019, I would say. I was, and I'm still working with Landia Egal, and at that time she received a mail saying, oh, if you have VR projects about climate change, why don't you submit them and we'll select a few of them, and the selected projects will be flown over to Australia, which was at this moment literally burning. And so we started discussing because it was very striking for her. And when she forwarded the mail to me, it was very striking for me that at the same time, this association was doing great things. It was helping authors, VR artists to showcase their work. But we would end up traveling very far in a country that was currently facing fires to talk about a VR project about climate change, and we would hope to get fundings to then showcase it in festivals where not that many people can actually see it because of the distribution limitation at this moment. So it was very striking for us. And then came the COVID, and suddenly during the pandemic, because of the pause, there was no planes, there was no rush, and we started to ask ourselves, what are we contributing to? Like we had the feeling to be that the wheel had stopped, and we were left really wondering, is it all making sense? So that's really how everything started. So we somehow started to connect the dots and see the elephant in the room. How can we talk about climate change if we don't even know what is our own impact? Do we know how do we compute? How do we calculate our own impact? And is it justified? Like everything we do as humans has impact. Just taking your car has an impact. Taking a plane has an impact. Buying a computer has an impact. So if we're not aware of the impact we have, how can we legitimate to do all the things we do if we don't know what is their negative impact? And especially if you're on a new medium where you don't reach that many people, is it worth it? So that all led to the Okawari project Caspar briefly talked about. So Okawari was upcycled from Umami, because at that time we started to really think about the whole process. So we tried to upcycle as much as we could. So we upcycled some elements from Umami. We started to use the famous R's, the reuse, recycle. So we recycled 3D assets, the art direction, some musical elements. And Okawari was conceived, and it was fortunately selected at the Venice Biennale in 2022. And it was a first way to raise awareness on the environmental impact of the XR and the digital industry within professionals. Like the idea was really to throw the question and see what happens. That was the process that led us to Okawari. So we presented Okawari over there. We made a special presentation about the carbon footprint of the project itself. And during the project, during the whole presentation, we had a counter and we were live counting the carbon footprint of the project. Literally, there's the creation of the project that had a footprint, and we were taking a share of everybody going through the experience. Like if they saw 10 pieces during the festival, we would take 1/10 of their impact. If they traveled from Australia, for example, we would take the whole impact of the trip, and we would take 1/10 of that and add it to the global impact of the project. That was a way for us to measure our impact. But to do this, we couldn't do it ourselves, so we did it with Marie-Véronique Gauduchon. She's one of the finest expert about carbon calculation. She issued a couple of new measurement methods in France. She's very good at that, and she helped us compute the fabrication footprint and the showing footprint, like the fact that we would go to Venice and then have people coming in and see the experience. So the first striking thing that you can see from this figure is that 3/4 of the footprint is actually festival goers. A couple of things are in French, but I think you can guess. So the fabrication, the creation of the piece is only 1/4 of the total footprint. So that was the first thing that struck us. It's okay, we need to be aware that when we do something, it has consequences, and we can't get away from those consequences. We create work that generates footprint. So that was the first strong element for us. But then to have a precise carbon footprint, we were lacking some elements. If you think about the digital infrastructure, everybody says the digital now is everything is in the cloud, but it's actually not in the cloud. The cloud is very real. Like the cloud is data centers, it's cables and under the sea, it's antennas for 4G, 5G. So digital has a very real side of it, and we were lacking some tools and some numbers to be able to really measure precisely the impact of creating a piece like Okawari or any other digital piece. And especially we're lacking the carbon footprint of the headsets. So that led us to the CEPIR project that I'm going to present you now. So the CEPIR project, the ambition is to determine the impact and the added value of the XR. It's to raise awareness within the industry and the support of the industry, meaning the public funds, the private funds, all the ecosystem around. And there's also an ambition to share actionable deliverables that I will present after that. And all within the immersive XR industry, we were not including, and we haven't included AI, and haven't included metaverse as such in terms of infrastructures and data centers and everything. And the global idea behind that was borrowed from sea shepherds. Like, if we can't save whales and dolphins, how are we going to save the ocean? So then for us, it was, if we can't reach a reasonable use of an emerging media that is still not implemented, how can we reach reasonable use for everything else that's already there? So that was the underlying question of the project. So the CEPIR project is partially funded by the French government. That's the 3 logos you can see on top, French Ministry of Culture, and it's a program for reaching 2030 in France. And 30% were not funded, so it's actually engagement. It's private money from our own companies So it's money from the three companies behind the project: Tiny Planets, founded by Landia Egal, like Coopérative Carbone, the carbon cooperative, let's say, with Marie-Véronique Gauduchon, our expert in energetic and climate transition, and Novelab, which I funded at that time. So that's the whole consortium behind the CEPIR project. And it's amazing that such an initiative, we had to bring some private money in it, because it could not be funded 100%. Maybe that's the partners, and you can see it for DocLab that was very keen to support the project. The results, I will detail not all of the results because there's lots, but there's a bibliography and the identification of the missing elements. We did some life cycle analysis of the headsets that we'll talk about. We did the carbon footprint of some industry players like a studio, a broadcaster, a distributor. We did some projections for 2030. I will talk a bit about that. We tried to identify the use case to be encouraged, like Caspar was talking about collective use. That's definitely one of the use that it makes sense to encourage. There's a whole report about best practices, and we have small cards, like action cards, that you can put in place in your studio. There's a carbon calculator available for any studio in the industry, open sourced. There's a global report, and there's a video retrospective also as the main results. So one of the first thing we did was the life cycle analysis of the headsets, because we were lacking data on what is the carbon footprint of a headset. And it's not limited for the headsets. It's not limited to the carbon footprint. In fact, we analyze lots of different impacts like pollution, use of water, lots of those impacts. So it's a multi-criteria analysis, because there was no data when we started the project. So we could not measure efficiently and precisely the impact of using VR headsets and distributing on VR headsets. So that's what we did. So you can see the pictures of the dismantlement of the headsets. We only used headsets that were no longer working and that were out of warranty in order to not create extra waste. And as I said, it's been evaluated around lots of different criteria, not only carbon. And this shows you in French, sorry, the 9 planetary limits against which we're trying to measure all of the impacts. So the result, that's in very, very summary. Everything's detailed in all of the different reports. So, but in summary, I'm focusing just on one example, a headset with we can't name the brands because for legal reasons we can't name the brands. But for one headset with OLED screen, we had an equivalent, a CO2 equivalent of 86.5 kilograms. Which is roughly 433 kilometers by car. It's around a smartphone, and that if you add the controllers, because it was without the controllers, you're roughly around a modern cell phone. That's a smartphone. And as an also something to be aware of, it's to manufacture one headset, it's almost the water consumption of 1 year of a French people. So when you buy a headset, you buy 1 year of water for an average French person. So that's striking results for us, and that's the répartition, that's the spread of the impacts over the life cycle. And as you can see, most of the impact is during manufacturing, because the manufacturing is really where all of the impacts are concentrated. So bear in mind that when you buy a new headset, most of the impact is already produced. And I will skip on this one. So those data we've produced lots of different datas. They are all integrated in the French database, Base Empreinte. So it might not speak to you, but this is a database where we have lots of different emission factors. And then, depending on your activity, you can use those factors to measure your impact. So that was one of the reason we were happy with the outcome of the project, because they are actually now integrated into a live working database in France, at least. We also had to compute approximations of all of the digital infrastructure. Like when you produce a VR piece, you need computers, you need people with cell phones, you need data centers because you have some code, you have code repository, you work with other people on the planet, and so you have all those data centers communicating, you have data versioning, and all of that. You need all of that to build your project. And then to distribute your project, you again need all of that. Like you need relay antennas, you need Wi-Fi, you need wired internet, you need people with computers or with headsets. So in order to evaluate the global impact, we had to produce emission factors for all of those elements. I will not spend too much time on those, but we had to produce all those numbers. It's a very technical work, so I will not focus too much on it. But just as an example, you can see that you have for no, there's a mistake between the two numbers, but you have the OLED and LCD headsets. It's a bit higher than the number I shown above, because now it's with the controllers. And you can compare that with other interesting elements. Like if you look at the, hopefully you can see my mouse. If you look at the television, a 60 inch, I think it is 60 inch television. It's 690 kilogram CO2 equivalent kilogram. So you could somehow say, okay, a headset is better than a TV. But we will see later that when you add things, that's where the problem comes. Because if your headset is replacing things, then it might work. It might be okay to use it. But if you keep on stacking things on top of each other, that's when the problems come. And you have also a laptop here at the bottom, so it gives you an idea of all the different equilibriums between all of those. So we have computed that also for networks, for working remotely, etc., etc. So don't worry about the numbers, but we really needed that to make a smart estimation of the global footprint of producing a project. And we are still lacking some data. We don't have data, for example, for 360 cameras, or for haptic gloves, or for specific equipments like vibrating fabrics and things like that. So we're still missing a bit of data, but we have most of it. And so all of this data led to the carbon calculator for the industry. So this is one of the important outcomes of the project. It's a real calculator. So you can, any studio in the world can use the calculator. It's open source, it's free, and you can, it's a Creative Commons license, a specific one, but it's absolutely free to use. And you can estimate your studio carbon footprint, which is very useful to get an idea of where are things, where you should optimize things. So it takes the form of an Excel spreadsheet. All of the emission factors I briefly talked about before, they are openly available in the Excel spreadsheet, which is very uncommon. Usually those things are hidden and hidden inside a black box. All of the sources and the calculation are documented in the user guide. There's an extensive user guide, so you can really do it almost on your own. You need data from your organization to be able to do this assessment correctly. But in the user guide, you've got the complete list of data needed to validate your carbon footprint. So it's all very accessible and open, and it gives you back the greenhouse gas emission calculation, and along with some uncertainties. Roughly, if you want to briefly get the picture of what it is, it's the activity data of your studio or your company multiplied by the emission factor of this activity, and that gives you your GHG greenhouse gas emission computation in the end. So I do this and that produce X and Y amount, and it's just the calculation of that. And you get a summary with customizable graphics, and it's a Creative Commons license. So I'm going to show you very briefly the type of graphics that it can produce. I will not detail the calculator itself, but the kind of graphics you get from that is, for example, that's a typical XR company that we analyzed. And you can see the how it's spread. Like there's some weight on the bâtiment, the buildings. There's some weight on the vehicles. If some people are commuting using their cars, for example, it's better to commute by bicycle or public transportation than cars. There's all of the moving around, like taking planes. If you go to meet clients, if you go to festivals, if you go to meet partners, every time you take planes, you will see that this bar gets higher and higher. There's the meals. One of the key findings in the meals is that you don't, as a studio director, you don't have, you can't really say to people you should eat this or that. But at least you can look at what are the most impactful sources of food, and then take the decision as a company to encourage certain types of foods that are good and healthy, but that have a low impact. There's also everything you buy, of course, the computers and everything, they all have impacts. There's a couple of things, and there's waste also. So you can have an overview of your organization footprint and start to take very simple actionable actions that really can help lower very quickly, like challenge all of the planes taken. You can have a stronger policy around planes. Okay, should I go there? Is there a train alternative? In Europe, especially, there's usually a train alternative that can work, etc., etc. So this tool is very, very handful, very, very useful to really help you tackle your own footprint and reduce it. One of the other really good outputs we've had are the best practice. It's I will show you one example. It's a simple document, and it covers all of the pipeline of constructing a VR experience. So that's the 26 best practice, and it's really for some of them it's very technical, like what is rapid iterative prototyping, why should you use it, the kind of engines, game engine you can use, comparison in terms of programming language, like combating, fighting lazy programming, using LOD. LOD is level of details, so it's race for FPS also. Why should you not enter the race for frames per second, etc., etc. So that's all very practical elements. And I'm going to detail one example so that you can better understand how you can use it directly if you're an artist or a studio or even a distributor. There are things for you in this. So the card itself is in French for now. We're looking for a bit of funding to just do the translation of everything to distribute it very broadly. But that's the global structure of one of the best practice card. So there's the title, there's the what we have observed, like the run for FPS. We have observed that there's a run for FPS. Everybody's trying to have higher frames per second, and everybody's rushing for usually realistic rendering. So that's what we observe. That's the targeted people, so developer, graphists, producers, testers, and everything. There's all of the levers you can activate to not enter this race for FPS. You can evaluate the necessity of having this kind of FPS. You can educate players. You can optimize in a good way so that you still have very good FPS, especially for VR, but you concentrate your resources, your CPU, GPU on what really counts. You can have a user-centered approach, so that's all the kind of levers you can use. And for each of the card, you have an evaluation of the effort it requires from the studio, the financial effort it represents, the economical gain you can get from it, and the environmental gain you can get from it. So that's a zoom on the header. So that's what I talked about, the effort to put it in place, the financial effort, then the economical gain and the environmental gain. And some of the cards are prioritized, meaning that's the cards where you have the best bang for bucks, the one that you can put in place very quickly, very easily, and that produce the best results. They are all open sourced and they are meant to be alive in the sense that if we have forgotten things, which might be possible, we are very open to update them. If there's new technologies, people can create new cards. If there's new languages, we can again create new cards and integrate that in the global document. We also did some forward-looking work, like prospective work. The prospective is different from perspective trying to guess what happens in the future. We did not try to guess what will happen to the VR industry because nobody can really guess what's going to happen. It's very hard. What we did is a prospective work. So in a prospective work, you try to imagine all of the possible scenarios. You then keep the ones that are the most likely to happen, and then you try to evaluate all of those scenarios and see if they can, if nothing changes, what happened and what are the environmental consequences. So this one is in French, sorry, because it's coming from the report, but I can summarize it for you. So that's the 5 scenarios we kept in the end. So there's a maximalist scenario where everybody is equipped with headsets and the VR is really spreading very largely. There's the industry scenario. We did a couple of interviews with industry professionals, and that's where they see VR evolving in 2030. There's the tendency scenario. If we just if the pace continues the way it's evolving today, like VR is spreading at this speed, and we just continued this tendency. There's the sober scenario, like we meaning that we choose really wisely what technology and the rate at which we get new devices and everything. And then there's the stopping scenario, I would say, where we stop to use VR. So those are the 5 scenarios that were taken into account, and we measured all of the scenarios. So there's quite a good number of outcome of this, but one of the very interesting outcome is that if we take the 5 scenarios into account, like the maximalist one, the industry one, the tendency, the sober one, and the renouncement one, if we project what is going to be the carbon footprint of one XR user and the total number of XR user, and if we compare that to the targets that we should meet to reach the Paris Agreement, like to stay under the 2 degrees of global warming. There's 2 different scenarios, but the international scenario, which is from the SBTI initiative, like that's the most commonly agreed scenario. In the maximalist scenario, if everybody, I mean, if in this scenario, if the XR is spreading at fast rate, not everybody is equipped. It's all documented, but then we see that we already in this scenario, just the XR usage is taking more than 100% of the digital budget. So literally in the maximalist scenario, in 2030, not everybody is equipped, but with only the equipment there, you cannot have any more digital appliances. You can't have any more a smartphone, you can't have a laptop, you can't have a TV, you can't have Netflix at the same time. You need to get rid of all of your digital equipment if you want to be in this scenario. So what's really interesting to see is that as when you calculate those things and you project them in the future, you realize how much there is not a budget for everything, which is bringing us to the next point. So to do that, we've used the projection to stay under 2 degrees. So, but I will skip this one. So that's the reduction target. So at this point, we were also lacking tools to realize our own impact. So what we did is calculator also to estimate your current digital footprint. So that's a very simple calculator. It's an Excel file also. It's available in the project. And you can say, okay, I have 1 laptop, I have a smartphone, I have a fixed tower computer, for example, with a screen, and I have a television that I share with my boyfriend or girlfriend, and I have 1 headset. So, okay, it's 2024, I'm already at 612% of the world budget, and I'm already over my French budget. So with this today, with this equipment today, we are already, someone that has this at home is already over his own budget. And there's for the same tool can be used to project in 2030 what would be a reasonable budget if you want to be within the limits agreed by the SBTI in 2030, like this one is 93%, you will have 1 laptop and 1 smartphone. And that's it. Anything you add is going to bring you over the budget. And we consider, I think, the smartphone is replaced every 5 years, and the laptop also. if I can remember correctly. So that, yeah, no, it's 5 years and 4 years. So somehow that gives you an idea of where we are now, where we have to be in 2030. And that gives you an idea, not necessarily of if XR is possible or not, it's just that it shows the place it can take. And probably if we all have VR headsets, it means it has somehow to replace the laptop, for example. So we're not yet in 2030, so we have levers we can activate today. Though there are mainly 3 of them: sobriety, meaning needing less, efficiency, of course, and low carbon energy. That's why, if I come back very briefly, that's why in France you have somehow a larger digital budget compared to the world budget, because most of the electricity in France is very low carbon. It's nuclear energy, so somehow you contribute less and you can have a bit more equipment. But if we talk about a global justice for the carbon emission, then having a budget per country does not really make any sense. So in the end, there's more deliverables, but that's the main ones. And also one of the last outcome I would like to talk about is the global list of recommendations that we've made after the project, at the end of the project, for all of the public institutions and also for the industry, like the key findings and the key interesting things. So for public institution in France, for example, there is not yet a very clear trajectory for 2030 and 2050. So we don't know really what XR and more largely what the digital industry should be in 2030 and 2050. We don't have a very precise trajectory. So if we don't have a trajectory, we don't know where we should go. So we should define those trajectory, and they should be compatible with the SNBC recommendations. We started to briefly talk about it, but we should prioritize the use. We're not going to have enough energy for everything. We're not going to have enough metals for everything. So if we push a bit, if we caricature a bit, at some point, public institutions will have to ask themselves, do we want 6G, 7G, or 8G, or do we want to have still hospitals and MRI in the hospitals? That's the kind of questions that are going to be raised at some point. And of course, this cannot be decided by one person alone. This cannot be decided by private institutions. This has to be a democratic debate. We have to define the terms and conditions for the development of XR. What is the framework and what is the space that XR can take? Because today all of the innovations are pushed, and we will see what happens. But AI is going to take a good portion of data centers' energy and of all the metals needed to build all the chips. So if we push AI to the maximum, if we push XR to the maximum, if we push any other new technology to the maximum, it's not sustainable. We can't push everything. So we have to define the space in which all of those technologies, digital technologies, can evolve. Adapt existing laws aimed at reducing environmental impact of the digital technology to XR, because there's nothing specific to XR. There are very easy things we can do, like public institutions and governments. They can limit the hardware production. They can limit the limit hardware, software, and cultural obsolescence. Like really, Europe is starting to implement things, but it could be much more it could be much faster. Like obsolescence is a nonsense. If you have a limited budget, it doesn't make sense to ask you to change or to buy new things every year. When you have a limited budget, you are very careful. Each month, each of us has a limited amount of money, and we prioritize things. And we can't update things every year. It doesn't make sense. So obsolescence is really something we could work on very easily. What can I detail also? Make access to subsidies conditional because state governments should not subsidize things that are not sustainable. Organize a citizen consultation for a responsible digital future. It's really, it comes back really to the prioritization here. If we want to prioritize, we need to have a public debate about that. Work in the spirit of equity and social justice. XR cannot be, for example, something only for the wealthy. If it's useful for the future, if it's useful for the ecological transition, it cannot be only useful to a handful, very small number of people. And public institutions have to raise awareness among businesses and users also. That's for the public institutions. I'm trying to finish quickly. And that's the recommendations for the industry and the artist professional. You need to become aware, informed, and accept the emotional burden that comes with it. Once you start to realize that we are working in a limited budget, we're starting to have problems with water, even in France. In Spain also, like Barcelona is having problems with water. So we are going to face lots of limitations. The temperature is going to continue to rise. So once you realize that, and once you make the connection, like the one we made, the one I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, once you start to say, okay, my everyday choices are also connected to that. If as a studio director, I took a lot the planes, and at some point I started to make the connection and say, okay, climate change is not just something I want to make projects about. It directly impacts what I do. I cannot talk about that and continue to travel the way I did, because it doesn't make any sense. It's how can I say, oh, you should be careful about climate change and do little things and continue to travel like crazy, which was my main impact. So once you start to connect everything, you start to realize that this is not something to just talk about. It is a framework in which all of your choices and decisions need to be entered. Like literally, all of your choices have an impact. So that's a journey, and you should not do it alone, because there's somehow you realize that the world that most of the big corporation publish or try to implement, it cannot happen that way because there's not enough of resources. So we have to find other ways to inhabit the world, and it can be very cool, but it's not what our parents told us. It will not be what was there before. It will be different. It can be great, but it will be different. So by doing this, you should join professional associations, talk about the issue, and do not stay alone in that. Another recommendation is question your company's vision and business model. What are you contributing to? My own path has been to say, okay, I funded a VR studio. I'm helping democratize VR. Somehow I'm contributing to making VR something and to adding a new device when we should reduce the number of devices. So my own personal path, and it's only valid for me, has been to resign from my own company. So I resigned last year from my own company because I considered on a personal level that I don't have enough time to spend time democratizing a new usage, a new device, when there are more important issues that are going to come very quickly. But that's a very personal trajectory. Everybody has its own trajectory. Before implementing an XR project, you need to question the need and the alternatives. You need to adopt a consequential approach. If I'm doing VR projects, then I'm going to help democratize devices. That will be another device on top of others. So should I do that? If you choose to do VR projects, eco-design, eco-produce, eco-distribute, use all the famous R's, reduce, reuse, repair, rot, recycle, try as much as you can to lower your impact. Reflect on how to contribute to the ecological transition through your projects. If your projects are about selling more stuff to more people, question yourself about the stuff that it's helping to sell. I applied that to myself because we were also doing some commercial work, and some of this work was also meant to market new things and have people buy new stuff. So really think about that. Mobilize to create digital commons and share open source data. That's really something that's not done in the digital industry. And we should share more things. Like there's today, I'm going to take a very small example. In the immersive media or interactive media field, there are, I don't know, there's probably 50 or 100 different algorithms to do body tracking using a camera. And everybody's reinventing the wheel over and over. Why do we have 100 different algorithms that are doing body tracking? We should have one, maybe two, maybe three maximum that have their own specificities, but we should really change the way we think about that. That's definitely. Utilize equipment, assets, knowledge. One of the key findings when we had all of the numbers and the impact numbers is that having headsets in all of the home does not make sense if we want to meet at least the Paris Agreement. So it should VR stay there because it has some good sides. It has to stay in a mutualized way, in a shared way. Like the equipment is not staying on shelves 99% of the time. It is shared. It's a common thing, and it's really used. And also get out of the triangle of inaction. Be proactive. Don't expect everything from public authorities or from users. The triangle of inactivity is companies saying, "Oh, we're doing what the consumers ask." Consumers are saying, "Oh, but it's the government that should say that should impose things to a corporation," and the government is saying, "Oh, but nobody's asking for that in the people electing us." So you have a triangle of inaction, and governments and companies are not going to change that. So it has to start from the individual level. And last one I added also just before the talk is, and for the artists, be radical. Artists are there to question things, and that's what we tried to do in CEPIR. It's really try to be very radical in the question we are asking, because I've been working in VR for more than 10 years now, and I'm literally asking myself, should I do this and should I stop? And we have to be very true to that, and then we need to ask ourselves the question, definitely. And as a conclusion, I wanted to reframe the question. The question that we had at the beginning for the talk was, can we make immersive arts more friendly? And somehow I wanted to reframe the question. It's not, can we make it more friendly? The question is more, what can we afford to do and how do we prioritize that? So XR is not alone in its field. It's a digital, it's a new media among lots of other different media, and it cannot be only a bit more responsible or a bit more eco-friendly if all and everything is continuing 100% at full speed. It will not work. We won't have enough resources for that, and it will raise the temperature way too much. So really, the question is, what are the benefits? What is the environmental cost? And how do we prioritize what we do? Which concludes the presentation. Just as a very brief thing, all of the information is available on this website, CEPIR.info. It's all in French for now, but we are looking for a bit of funding. We don't need that much, but a bit of funding to translate all of the deliverables, as much deliverables as we can in English, so that it can be diffused more widely. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Amaury. This is incredible, and thank you so much for your work. It's really so thoughtful and a call to action, right, for all of us. You know, what are we going to do? What can we afford to do? And I just love how, you know, it really gets down to the singular person and gives them things they can do, and both shows your own personal responsibility, really, of everyone who's working in this field, and to have a way to really be aware, and all the ethical ways that you're, you know, making it all transparent, and the digital commons, and making it a collective project. It's really, really remarkable project. So thank you. And it's interesting, I was thinking Earth Day for us, you know, was yesterday, April 22nd. And of course, I myself was on a plane for 7 hours of that coming back from Colombia. And I thought, my God, how am I you know, like, what am I doing? So it really, all of us need to think, you know, very carefully about how we're contributing and what we can do.
Yeah, the moment you connect your the things you do daily with the fact that we need to act and do things, this moment is really challenging, because then you consider all of your choices.
Yeah, exactly. And what you know, and having this report is going to be so key. We're going to have a calculator, you know, and so you can just make it part of your process to look at and have a way to evaluate, as you said. So really fantastic work. And there are many questions in the Q&A, which we'll get to. I was also thinking, in terms of being radical, we always end at 1:30 because we're used to, you know, broadcast mode and classroom mode. But if you have a few extra minutes, we could stay on a little and try to get to some of these audience questions. Great.
Sure.
And the audience too, if you need to go at 1:30, please do. But if you want to stay on, we'll run this a little longer, because I think this is a really, really important conversation. And Caspar, Sonnen, why don't you join us as well? Hello, Caspar. And so we can talk a little bit also, as we wanted to, about from you, Caspar, how did this impact your thinking and your work?
Well, I think similar to some of the questions in the Q&A, so I don't want to take too much away from that, but I think to me it really deepened the thinking that we have here within the organization, and I think um, there's one really concrete aspect here of like thinking, what am I doing, connecting the dots, what can we do? I think maybe one thing to me that that really struck me was the first conversations when Amaury was working on the research, saying like, well, really, like if we follow the projections of everybody having a headset at home, that's actually not feasible. And sort of the fast pace at which the devices are being replaced or becoming obsolete. And we started talking about like, hey, actually, in a way, I think festivals have a huge question to ask around like people flying around and stuff being put up for relatively short periods. But if we think about immersive media being presented comparable to maybe how cinema was presented originally, not in the living room, but in specific physical venues that people living around that venue would go to collectively experience a thing like cinema. It really made me think of like, what does it mean artistically for a medium to say, as many still do, it will only become a success once everybody has a headset at home. And I actually felt like maybe it's the other way around, because we never said cinema will become a success once everybody has a television at home. We, funny enough, actually said the opposite. Like television in the eyes of many also had a negative impact on the communal experience, the artistic value of it, the building a movie palace for it instead of sitting on your couch as a potato. So I think the thinking around that, to me inspired me actually to really move into what we're now doing within the festival, starting our year-round venue, and also looking at like, made me think of as a kid going to video game arcade halls to play my video games. Like, what if like then the personal computer came about? What about digital art? What about games as an art medium? Would it have become an artistic medium more easily if we wouldn't have computers at home, and if it would have stayed a physical destination that we would go together to play games instead of doing it in our bedrooms? I don't know. But I think in a way your research is about the climate, but it triggers much wider thinking about the role of immersive media within our culture. Anyway, I think we should go to the questions in the Q&A, because there's some really good ones there.
Yes.
And if I can add very briefly, I mean, one of the very interesting things also is that because today we have lots of different bubbles, like the filter bubble effect, everybody lives in his own bubble. We tremendously need collective experience so that we rebuild commons, we rebuild common references, common places, common narratives. So we desperately need that now, for sure.
Great. All right. So Josephine Rydberg has a question about the stats for social VR and for streaming. Do you have any of those kind of stats?
What we have is emission factors that take into account the use of the data centers, like the bandwidth of data you're using. So what's not easy to do is that if you take some metaverse, for example, they will transfer only a small amount of data. You will download the world, for example, and then you will just transmit a bit of data. But some of them are very streamed, like they will stream complete portions of environments as you progress in the environment. So it's very hard to estimate the number, the importance of the data being transferred. So you can for sure now we have the emission factors for the headsets. We have an emission factor linked to the bandwidth transferred, but then there is a very case by case analysis that should be done. I don't know how much VR chat, how much data VR chat is transmitting per second. I don't know how much data Roblox is transmitting per second, for example. So without those private numbers, it's very hard to estimate it.
Right. How about when you're spending time in a VR headset? You do calculate that, right? When you're spending time in the game, that's in there, right?
If you I don't know if we could do that. I don't know if the SDK of the headsets manufacturer would let us do that, but you can probably, as the experience goes, you could have some kind of background process that just keeps track of the data transferred, so it can give you the estimation. That's a process you should launch before launching the experience, like the VR social experience, for example. But it can be any other type of game that has to be online, and then you could do the computation. But I don't know if the marketplaces from the headset manufacturers, if they would let us publish an app that launches in the background and that computes somehow your estimated carbon footprint. I'm not sure they would be very keen to let us do that.
A question from Zoe Rashbash from Watershed UK. Thanks for a really informative presentation. We are a venue opening a new immersive exhibition space, the new one at Watershed. Excited about that. Could the emission factors be generated from the project? Could the emission be generated from the project be used to help us calculate the emissions of various exhibitions?
Most probably. Again, it would depend on the technical details and the technical implementation, because if it's tethered or non-tethered headsets, it's not the same. So at some point there's you need to have the precise technical details, but the factors can be for sure they can be used. They can really just download the calculator. They can download the reports. The emission factors are also in the report, and they can build upon that. One thing to keep in mind is that as soon as you have some closed things, like for example, if you're using Amazon Web Services, they would give you some kind of information about the footprint, but you have to trust what they give to you. So all of these calculations, they are approximations, but you need to start somewhere at some point. But definitely, depending on their implementation, they can look at their headset models. If they are LCD or OLED models, then they can get the emission factors for those headsets. If they were using, for example, the Vision Pro of Apple has published their own carbon footprint analysis, their life cycle analysis for the Vision Pro. For computers, data centers, and everything, there's all the numbers, so they can do a first estimate using that.
Great. And another question on this immersive space is opening in July. Do you have any advice for venues hoping to embed best practice from the get-go? Again, from Zoe.
So they could, it's in French, sorry. Hopefully it will be in English at some point, but they can start to, as a starter, they can really look at all of the best practices. It is a bit more focused on the fabrication of VR experiences, for sure. They can also download the French animation sector, like traditional animation, but using computers, has done the equivalent, but they have a whole section on buildings, food for the teams, etc. So that's an extra level of very interesting information that they could use. And then really, yeah, it's a kind of process where you go through everything you need, how you operate, and try to apply the permacomputing principles for like try to make can I maybe I can let me look at that because it's also in the report. It's in French 3, but there are some permaculture principles that have been applied to different things. And for instance, some of them have been applied to computing. So it made the permacomputing initiative. And it's very practical. It's a very practical way to start things like build small module that have a very specific function, try to reuse, recycle, and everything. So there's lots of rules that you can apply to your own business, to your own installation, to your own initiative. There are schools in public schools in France now that are starting to have perma teaching guide, let's say. So how can you use all of those very basic and simple principles to your own activities? So starting from this permaculture spirit is really a good way to start, I would say.
Yeah, permaculture is a whole world. And
Yeah.
I imagine, yeah, in the architecture field, there's so much in terms of the actual space itself that they could look into. So again, looking at these different disciplines as you did too, to remember we're this cross-section of many disciplines too.
Definitely.
A question from Melanie Moser. Are there any calculations available for repairing use or how to remedy an overuse? Not necessarily carbon capture, but actions or returns that could be calculated to offset. Thank you. Amazing report, technology measuring.
I don't know if I got the question right. Yeah.
So maybe more like action, your actions or the return in your actions, the impact of your actions around repair, like if you're how to remedy, I guess more around the actions. I don't know, that's how I'm interpreting. Are there any kind of available for repairing our use or to remedy our overuse? I mean, I think a lot of your work, it's all about kind of repairing what we've already started, the trajectory we've already started in terms of, and trying to stop the one around everyone owning a headset in their house and such, and our travel.
Yeah. The global spirit was really to say, okay, it's a new media, it's not yet implemented, so how can we just try to rationalize it before it becomes widespread and try to think before we actually develop and implement. Right now, most of the tech is and most of the digital things are developed just because we can do it. We can have 5G, so let's deploy 5G. We can have 6G, so let's deploy 6G. But nobody questions that before. Like, what is the real use of 5G today? We have a couple of weird examples where some surgeon used it to operate remotely, but you can already do that in Wi-Fi and tethered internet. So we have a couple of weird examples, and right now 5G is really used to see cat videos in 4K. So that's not a very convincing use case. So really the thing we should inverse today is not let's not do things because we can do them. Let's do things because we need them. And repair is a very good example. Like, let's first repair everything we have. Let's first use everything we have and go to the maximum life of everything we have before implementing new things. If you take a step back, is it a problem if the next generation of VR headsets only arrives in like 50 years from now? is it gonna be a problem for humanity if the whatever headsets comes in 50 years from now instead of 2 years from now? What will it change? And if the benefit of that is to keep the planet inhabitable for humans, if the benefit of that is just that we can live longer on a healthier planet, then I'm okay to wait 50 years for the next VR headset. It's not a problem. And I'm okay to wait 50 years for 6G and maybe never see 6G. I don't care.
Yeah, that's great. What do we do as an industry about Apple Vision Pro and that whole headset that's coming down? I mean, what's interesting about that, and I don't know if it's not necessarily a good thing, but they're seeing it as a replacement for computers almost. So, you know, you had said, oh, if you use the VR headset, get rid of the laptop. I think that's their vision, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is. Replacement is good. I mean, if it works,
Wear it on
then
the face.
it can be good. The problem is that history is showing that replacement almost never works. TV hasn't killed radio, hasn't killed cinema, not yet at least. I mean,
And do we
sales-
really want that? I mean, we also
and do we
don't
want that?
or we want our old technologies and our platforms.
No, definitely.
Love them and they're different.
I'm a radio lover, and I don't want radio to die, and it's still there and vibrant, so it's great. So historically, there's always an accumulation of things. It never, most of the time, it never replaces. There's a couple example where it does, but mostly it just adds up. And the more energy we have, the more we use, the more technology we have, the more we accumulate.
So a question from Felix Dexy. I have one question about calculating the hardware. When you dismantle the headsets, what are the most used materials or components which might be sourced from minings? How did you identify the materials?
That's a good question, but it's a very specific and technical question. We haven't dismantled the headsets ourselves because we're not dismantlement experts. So we worked with a French organization that's specialized in that, and so they have dismantled everything. And what they do is that they go as small as possible. So they try to go down to the very smallest components possible. And for most of the components, they have a collective database where they have the list of all the materials like copper, cobalt, and everything. So they have the amount of materials for all of the components. Some of the components are problematic, like if you have a specific CPU that's made by whatever brand, they will not detail everything that's inside. Not all of the time. Sometimes they would give you the information and you have to trust them. And sometimes they will just say, okay, it's a trade secret, so I won't tell you what's inside. So there are still a couple of gray areas for specific components, but most of the time they have quite good and precise data. And the last part is where it comes from. That's very hard and almost impossible to track back. Like it's really hard for them to know that this copper comes from there and this iron, this cobalt is coming from this mine, which is a mine that is problematic because there's I don't know kids working in that. There's no traceability. There's no tracking of that. So this last part is really hard. The only thing they can do is make connections and say, okay, I'm going to say stupid numbers, but let's say half of the cobalt mines are in dictators, countries with dictators, for example. So probably there's a problem with this material or that material because most probably half of it is coming from places where there's problems. But that's only suppositions.
Yeah, I mean, talking about another place to be radical, because I was thinking too, the Earth Day, the focus here is plastics and people. So what are eco materials we could use even to make these headsets, you know? Like, I'm sure there's so many other materials we could use that would not be as detrimental to the environment, but that's going to take a while.
Yes.
Okay, so the next question from Leon Carrizosa, about your recommendations around tech and culture obsolescence. I think we all know that archiving art projects in VR can be difficult. These can become inaccessible due to compatibility issues with future devices and become something of an obsolete or disposable product. Can standardization of formats such as OpenXR solve this problem, or will it be insufficient? Great question.
I would say that there's a double problem. When we were trying to do the carbon footprint of Umami and then Okawari, in France, when you have subsidies from the government, you have to archive your project and you have to give it the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, so the French National Library. So they have a way to store digital projects. And so we asked the French Digital Library, how long is it stored? And they said forever. So we said, okay, so that means that we're going to have a carbon footprint of our project being archived and stored that's going to grow forever because it will never stop. So somehow, if you project that, it would mean that our carbon footprint would be infinite. Because it's going to be stored forever. So that's really funny because it somehow illustrates the limitation of our current way of thinking. Probably we should not archive everything. Probably we should not produce as much as we produce. So at some point we need to have some sort of limits. Like the planet has limits, everybody understands it, but somehow we continue to think without limits, and that really is a problem in itself. So that's the first problem I can see with this archive problem. The other one is that definitely anything that goes towards standardization so that people stop to do their own implementation of things, their own infrastructure, their own whatever, I don't know, way of doing things. As much as you should definitely share much more. We should have much more common things so that we don't spend resources and energy adapting and doing the same work 10 times just because the headset manufacturer can't align themselves on one standard because it's it's competition. That is nonsense. When you have a limited budget, why ask people to reinvent the wheel 4 times? Like, if you push a little further, why should we have 10 different brands of headsets? Does it make sense? If you have limited resources, why should we have and all those different brands? Okay, one is a bit more this, the other one is a bit more that. Yeah, but the difference is very small in the end, and in the end, for people that like VR, they end up with 3 or 4 different headsets, and they don't use 3 or 4 different headsets.
Right.
It's a nonsense.
Right, and like the iPhone, where iPhone 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 just goes.
Yeah. And each one is the best one ever produced.
Yeah. Okay, and we have a follow-up question to that from Carol Darlum. Follow-up to this, interested to hear your perspective on the proprietary aspect of XR immersive tech, such as hardware headsets, increasing this tendency towards story project obsolescence and increasing the constant energy required overall. For example, constant energy required to reload, screen, share elements, how to navigate.
Not sure I got it.
So she's asking, the proprietary aspect of XR immersive tech, such as the hardware and the headsets, and increasing this tendency towards story project obsolescence. So I guess the fact that you can't see it and increasing the constant energy required overall. So the proprietary aspect of headsets, I guess, versus shared headsets. So I guess the collective part would be solution to that. Increasing this trend towards story project obsolescence. I mean, I guess to your point, you're saying you're questioning why does the story have to live forever? So in a way, obsolescence could be good. And increasing the constant energy required overall to reload screen share elements. I mean, those are technical questions that have to be solved, I think. Like whoever create the headsets.
For the first one, the proprietary problem, it goes back also to the notion of standard, and the more standards we have, the more proprietary architectures we have, the more we use energy for doing the same thing several times. So probably it does not go, it does not fulfill the goal of simplifying things and reducing our overall impact. So the way this, definitely. And the necessary energy, I don't know if I got it right, but again, in everything we conceive, we should definitely seek the elegance of sobriety, I would say, by reducing everything we can. It's a constraint, but it's a beautiful constraint. Like try to do something that's beautiful in the lightest way possible. It's Saint-Exupéry, the French writer that wrote Le Petit Prince. He was saying a book is finished when there's nothing to remove. And we should definitely apply this philosophy, seek the beautiful of being as sober as possible.
Yeah, scarce.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I think we kind of already talked about this, headsets in everyone's home and if they're used to replace other devices in air travel. Yeah, so we talked about how that whole idea of replacement versus addition.
Yeah, the problem is that history is really showing us that we do not replace or very little. And then if we take really the budgets, like the 2030 and the 2050 budgets, we literally can't have a lot of devices. Like it's going to be 1, 2 devices, maybe 3, and mostly shared. Like most probably having home headsets, if they are only used by 1 or 2 people, it's probably not compatible with the Paris objective.
Yeah.
Shared,
Yes,
different story.
The whole idea of a budget is so important. We all we have limited money, so we understand that concept.
Yeah.
So we need to apply that to this. And then just a final comment, not a question, from David Thames. The book, The One Device, The Secret History of the iPhone by Brian Merchant, 2017. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Includes a detailed description of the resources that go into making an iPhone, and much of it applies to XR gear. Yes. Of course, there was an AR experience all about that by Kareem Khalifa, about all the materials needed to make an iPhone, and he was looking not so much as the environmental, but the social impact in the mining areas, and that kids were brought into it.
Yes, 7 grams. Yeah, we actually did Novelab did the technical part of the project. Yeah.
All right.
It's a great project, and somehow it shows sometimes as artists the contradiction we can have. Like he's It's a great project. He's alerting on all of the mining problems and the fact that a device like that has an impact, and it's shown on devices like that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really smart. You know, we'll end here because I think we could talk a lot more, but there was a talk we had with Duke Redberg, an Canadian Indigenous, about technology, and his big statement was, we can do it, but is it wise? You know?
Yeah.
Why? Is it wise?
Yeah.
So
Should we do it only because we can?
right. We should be asking, is it wise? You know,
Yeah.
what's the wisdom behind our actions and what we do? So
exactly.
you gave us a lot of wisdom and a lot of fantastic information. I'm just thrilled that this is out there, and I think this is just the beginning, and I'm hoping we all can help support this and move this through the XR industry so that we're all thinking more mindfully. And I wish you the best of luck as you continue to work on this. It's really wonderful to have you here today. And thank you, Caspar, so much for bringing Amaury, and for all that you do too to support this industry. So thank you both, and have a good day, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.